Report relative to the fiscal year that ended May 31st, 2017. Anybody else would like to listen to the report, welcome to stay.
That'll get them out.
Laura, you have a microphone, you can stay right there.
Great.
Yes, the mayor said that.
Check, 1, 2.
Okay. You're going to present the audit for the village for the fiscal year ending May 31st, 2017. Our audit, we issued an unmodified opinion again this year on the village's financial statements, which basically means that the financial statements that you have in front of you materially represent the financial position and the operations of the village as of May 31st, 2017. The pages 3 and 4 are what we call the government-wide financial statements. These incorporate all of the assets and liabilities of the village. And you'll notice that different from last year to this year is that, again, there's a business type activity on the financial statements, and this relates to the newly established sewer fund that began as of June 1st of 2016. And we'll go over that in detail. There'll be separate financial statements for the sewer fund that are contained in here. But I'd like to go to the general fund on page 5, which is the main operating fund of the village. The general fund ended the year with a total fund balance of $1,861,741. $1,384,117 of that amount is what we call unassigned. And that's the amount that you as the board can utilize for whatever purpose you so choose to utilize that for. In addition, there are some restricted amounts, and the total amount of that is $475,000. The majority of that is for capital reserves, capital projects reserves. The operations of the general fund, on page 6. The general fund ended the year with a surplus of a little over $322,000 before a transfer out to the capital projects fund to help fund the project there. And also there was a small transfer in the amount of $14,100 to the sewer fund during the current year. So after transfers out of $131,417, the general fund surplus was a little over $191,000. On page 8 is begins the financial statements for the newly established sewer fund. As you see there, this looks very similar to a business type, and that's why it's called a business type activity, but it looks very similar to what you would see commercial type financial statements with the assets and non-current assets, which we, with Chris's assistance, identified those assets that the village was carrying within their governmental funds, and transferred those assets over to the newly established sewer fund, and also liabilities related to the serial bonds payable and compensated absences, and the net pension liabilities. Those were all transferred over as of June 1st of 2016. As you can see, the net position, the largest portion of that net position relates to the net investment in capital assets of the sewer fund. That is the total capital assets net of depreciation less outstanding debt that is carried within the sewer fund. That leaves an unrestricted deficit in the current year of $460,000 for the deficit for the current year. The next statement is the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. This is, you would call the income statement. Total operating revenues, $684,000. Operating expenses, which include depreciation of close to $100,000, is $857,000, leaving an operating loss of $173,000. However, you do have the special assessment, which is under non-operating revenues, $115,000. So total non-operating revenues were $82,608, and the loss before transfers and the special item, which is the transfer of all of those assets and liabilities into the sewer fund, was $90,829, and the total change in net position at the end was $72,796. Page 10 is a cash flow statement for the sewer fund. The sewer fund had net cash used by operating activities about $141. So pretty much a break even for the first year of operations for cash that's being generated by the operations. And then you have the special assessment, which is non-capital financing activities, basically the special assessments. And then cash flows from capital and related financing activities, which is a use of cash of a little over $61,000. Brings us down to net increase in cash of $54,067. As far as the notes to the financial statements, note 1 is the summary of significant accounting policies. There were no significant changes in the accounting policies for the village from the prior year. No significant standards that were implemented in the current year that required any additional disclosures in here in the summary of significant accounting policies. Note 2 details all of the notes related to various activities and funds of the village, deposits and investments, the capital assets that are carried in the governmental activities, which would be the general fund, and the business type activities, which would be the sewer fund. The pension obligations, and this was a standard that was implemented in the prior year, GASB statement number 68, related to the net pension liabilities. And those liabilities have decreased across the board for all participants in the ERS, Employees Retirement System, because the measurement date of that is March 31st, 2017, which is the state's fiscal year and which is also the retirement's fiscal year end. And the stock market had a very good year from April 1st of 2016 to March 31st of 2017. So the fair value of those assets, when they measured that at March 31st, 2017, it increased significantly from the March 31st, 2016 date, which basically leaves the ERS system funded at the level of 94.7%. So that was an improvement. And that liability for the general fund is recorded in the government-wide financial statements, doesn't affect the general fund balance. The sewer fund, that liability is recorded within those financial statements as a business type activity. Other post-employment benefits and the long-term liabilities and net position and fund balance note that starts on page 27 details out what the calculation that I gave you for the net investment in capital assets. And also on page 28, the detail of the fund balances in the general fund, what those restricted amounts are for debt, equipment, and the North Avenue Connector project. The last section is the required supplementary information, and this is required by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Two of these statements relate to the pensions and the pension liabilities and presenting 3 years and 4 years of information. Eventually, the chart on page 33 will be filled out once we get to 10 years, and then they'll be rolling off. And then on page 34 and 35 is the budgetary comparison schedule for the general fund and the notes to the budgetary comparison schedule. We also have a management report, which is the separate report to you as the governing board of the village, and our required communications to you as the board. Also included in there are the summary of significant accounting estimates that are included within these financial statements, and recently issued accounting standards. The next one that will have some kind of impact on the village is GASB Statement Number 75, which deals with the other post-employment benefits, and that will be effective May 31st of 2019. We had no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses to report as a result of our audit. We had one other matter and an operational matter, and the operational matter really relates to cybersecurity, which we're including in all of our management reports this year, just so that the board is aware that if you haven't, turned on the TV or opened a newspaper or turned on the radio, that cybersecurity is an important thing related to the operations of the village, and for any entity that is using the internet. And as technology increases, we're going to be using that more and more, so it becomes even more important related to the security of your IT infrastructure. I'd like to thank Chris, for all of her assistance and in having to dig through information in order to ensure that we had the accurate numbers for the establishment of the sewer fund, for the assets, the liabilities, and splitting all of that information out in order to be able to present the sewer fund as a separate standalone business type activity. Big check. And as you look through these financial statements, please feel free to contact me with any questions that you may have regarding the financial statements.
Laura, page 11. In this document, your other matters and operational matters. The review of payroll registers.
Yes.
So that report, which is received from, coming back from paychecks,
Yes.
should be looked at in comparison to what went to them?
Right.
Okay. So we're looking at a comparison between what comes back and what was sent to them.
What was sent to them and what is coming back to them, or coming back to the village, yes. I think, Mayor, that would be something that would be very similar, that if payroll was being processed in-house, you would want to ensure that the information that was put into the payroll system, and you'd be reviewing the payroll reports that are being generated from the system. So, similar type of review.
Any questions that you guys have? Quickly?
Just have to digest
Yeah, there may be some as we take a look at this and look through. So if there are, we can contact you.
I'll forward to each of you Laura's email address and phone number so you have it handy.
Good.
Thank you.
Yep.